Before we go back over all these things, I'd like to look at Luke 9, because there's some great details in Luke 9 to help us out with this. So where are the disciples? Why didn't they believe him? Where was their faith? Why does he have this charge for them? Why does he answer them in seemingly such a vehement way where he says, "You perverse generation"? I want to point out a couple things from chapter 9. Number 1, in chapter 9, verse 1. When Jesus had called the 12 together, he gave them power and authority to drive out demons and to cure all diseases. Now, isn't that interesting? So in the same chapter, now that the chapters are a little bit happenstance because they're not inspired, they were put in by scholars later so we could just not have scrolls, right, and turn right to things. But isn't it interesting that in this particular place, in this particular time, not long time-wise, before this event, he pulled them aside and he said, "I'm giving you authority to do this. I am giving you the authority to cast out demons. You have this authority now. I'm giving you authority to heal diseases. You have this authority now." Does that make sense? So now when we come in Luke 9 to the same example, we're going to pick up in verse 37 here. It says, remember, this is coming down the mountain. It's the same thing. "The next day, when they came down the mountain, a large crowd met him. A man in the crowd called out, 'Teacher, I beg you to look at my son, for he is my only son. A spirit seizes him, and he suddenly screams.'" So now we have all this detail. This is kind of interesting. It's widely noted that Paul refers to Luke as our beloved physician. It's believed that he was indeed a physician or a doctor. And in his gospel, he explains all these physical symptoms. He says here, "A spirit seizes him and he suddenly screams, and it throws him into convulsions so that he foams at the mouth. It scarcely ever leaves him and is destroying him. I begged your disciples to drive it out, but they could not." "You unbelieving and perverse generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you and put up with you? Bring your son here." Even while the boy was coming, the demon threw him to the ground in a convulsion. But Jesus rebuked the impure spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father, and they were all amazed at the greatness of God. Well, everyone was marveling at all that Jesus did. He said to his disciples, "Listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men." But they did not understand what this meant. It was hidden from them, so that they did not grasp it, and they were afraid to ask him about it. An argument started among the disciples as to which of them would be the greatest. Jesus, knowing their thoughts, took a little child and had him stand behind him. Then he said to them, "Whoever welcomes this little child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. For it is the one who is least among you who is the greatest." "Master," said John, "we saw someone driving out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he is not one of us." "Do not stop him," Jesus said, "for whoever is not against you is for you." So I want to kind of look at some of these little details about the disciples, because if it's mustard seed, if they've been told by Jesus, you have the power to do this. You can now do this. If they've been out on mission journeys, right? If we were to look at some of their missionary journeys, for example, they come back to Jesus and they report to him, and they're super excited. And they say, "Oh, we cast out demons in your name." And they say, "We healed the sick. We did all these crazy things. It was so amazing what God was doing through us." And Jesus replies to them. He says, "I was in heaven when Satan was cast out." Essentially, he says this. He says, "Don't rejoice because the demons are subject to you. Rejoice that your name is written in the book of heaven." So we know that they had already, in a sense, wielded this power. They had already exercised this power in other points and places in their life, and in other journeys and things in their lives. They'd already done it. So this isn't new to them. This isn't the information isn't new. The gifting isn't new. This is something they had already done. So then in this thing happens. And I'm just going to set this up. And I want to say some of this I'm trying to look at and create an idea from the Scripture. And I'll try to point out where this is just my idea and you can disregard that. And we'll stick to what the Scripture says. But think about this for a moment. So these guys, the 9 that were left behind, are in the crowd and they're arguing. They've just publicly failed in front of who knows how many hundreds or tens of people. And now they're arguing about it. Then when Jesus comes back down the mountain, he has a pretty, I don't know if I want to say severe, a pretty hard statement that he gives to them. You unbelieving and you perverse generation. And realistically, we'll come back to it. He's talking to everybody that's there. And so they in a sense, they failed in front of humans. They've failed, in a sense, in front of Jesus. They've failed at something they should have been able to do. And now when they ask him, why were we unable to do it? He says, because you didn't have faith. You didn't have confidence in what you could expect God to do. You didn't have confidence in it. So what caused that? What caused the confidence? The lack thereof. Maybe we can glean a little bit from their response to Jesus when he talks about the fact that he's going to be taken and he's going to be crucified, right? Because he communicates that to them. In the Matthew account, it says that they became very grieved. Right? So what is grief? Right? Grief is sorrow. Grief is like it's like a helpless sorrow. It's a sadness about what's happening to someone or to yourself or something like that. It's a grief. When we grieve, and when we can grieve in like a godly way, right? Where we feel the sorrow, we can appreciate the sorrow, we can appreciate the gravity of the situation that's caused the sorrow. But at the same time, we can acknowledge that God is in control, that we live in a broken world, and broken things happen in a broken world, regardless of what we want, right? But in the midst of that grief, we're still able to say that the Lord is in control. He allowed this to happen, and he can bring something good out of this, right? That's kind of a grieving in faith. These guys don't seem to be at this point in a big moment of faith. In verse 46, after he tells them this, and I think this is important, an argument started. An argument started. So you have the failure, the public failure. You have the argument with the people. Because, and again, I don't want to read too much into this. There's really no argument to be had. You tried and you failed. But it's a lot of times, what causes us to start these arguments? Fear, pride, right? These are the things that cause the arguments with people around us when we fail, or whatever it might be. We can lash out. All these different things are going on in the disciples' minds. They're wrestling with these things. In this case, or to add to it, I should say, in verse 44, he says, "Listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men." But they did not understand what this meant. It was hidden from them, and they did not grasp it, and they were afraid to ask him about it. So we have to let's ask a question here. It says that it was sealed from them, literally sealed from them. They didn't understand it. So there's a couple possibilities here. And one of the possibilities is that Jesus said something directly to them, and then in a sense manipulated them or did something with them where they could not understand it. That's one possibility, that he said something directly to them, I'm going to die, they're going to take me, and then he made it so they can't understand it. That is a possibility. I don't necessarily think that's what happens here. I think what happens here is that we know what they're like. They're embarrassed, they're wrestling with what he's told them, they've failed, they've been rebuked, and now he says, now I'm going to die, and they're going to take me, and I'm going to die. I don't think, and this is an opinion, you can throw it away, I don't think that the idea here is that Jesus told them that and then made it so they can't understand it. I think the idea is that because of what they're going through in the moment, because of their lack of faith and kind of indulging in their emotional portion of failure, they can't understand it. And I think it's important too because they make the point they were too afraid to ask him. It was fear. Fear is kind of the antithesis of faith, isn't it? If faith is expecting God to do what he said he would do, then if I fear, well, I'm doing the absolute opposite of that. I'm saying God's not going to do what he said he would do. Like, for example, when he says that he'll work all things together for good, for those that love him and are called according to his purpose. When something comes into my life that I feel like is bad, that's causing me suffering, if I respond out of fear to that thing, what I'm saying is, you're not actually going to work this for good. So it's important. Nobody's saying we don't have grief about the bad. Does that make sense? So please don't go out of here thinking I'm saying you should never grieve and you should love everything. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is when we go through grief and difficulty or even failure, we need to still walk through those things with faith In other words, that God is going to do what he said he would do. That he's able to work this for good. Now, they don't have the book of Romans yet, right? And so they don't know Romans chapter 8, verse 28. They don't know the promise per se that God works all things together for good for those that are called according to his purpose and those who love him. They may not know that, but they do know who Jesus is. They've followed him around. They've talked with him. They've dialogued with him. They've seen his mercy. They've seen his kindness. And they have Nathanael here, right? Nathanael is one of these 9. Remember Nathanael all the way back from the beginning of the gospel, John, where Jesus says to Nathanael, I saw you when you're under the fig tree. And Nathanael's confession, my Lord and my God. So there was something that happened in Nathanael's life when he's under a fig tree somewhere that we have no idea. And it was so personal between him and God that when Jesus acknowledges, I saw you there, the confession of his heart, the faith that is expressed, the confidence of who Jesus is this immediate confession, my Lord and my God. When you have Peter and who I can't remember who all, I think it's Peter, James, and John, they're out fishing. Remember, cast your net on the other side. They cast their net on the other side. They start hauling all these fishermen, this fishing. I guess they're all 12 over there. They start hauling all the fish in. And you got to love it because John's like, this is the Christ. Right? They have like this like, okay. This is God. This is not normal. You have all these different events that have happened before this, that have collaborated their experience and the words of Jesus. You have the miracles. You have Cana of Galilee, the water into wine. Right? So you have all these things that have come to this point. But for whatever reason, the reason appears to be is failure. That there's something caused them to not believe. Something caused them to believe that this isn't going to work this time. Things aren't going to pan out this time, or whatever it was.